Today on Detroit Muscle, we start a brand new bottom dollar project that'll take a tired 80s icon and show you how to get some go fast out of it.
Hey folks, thanks for joining us. Now we just about got our old Mopar, Project Ultraviolet, all dialed in and ready to take it on its maiden voyage. So we're gonna go ahead and start us another project. And luckily for us, she just showed up.
And we decided to take a crack at a budget build, and when it comes to bang for your buck, doesn't get much better than a project like this. A 1986 Iroc Z.
These were the cream of the crop when it came to third-gen Camaros. They were basically a Z28 with an upgraded suspension setup, unique badging, and a 190 horsepower tune port injected 305 small block. Believe it or not, that was quite a bit of power for the time.
And with original muscle era cars getting more rare and more pricey, one of these 80s era pony cars is a great place to start if you're working with a budget. There are a gazillion parts available for these cars, and they already handled and stopped way better than anything made in the 60s or 70s. Oh, and another bonus? She's got T-tops.
We're going to be working on a $10,000 budget, and that's going to include purchasing the car. Now we spent $3 grand on it, so we're going to have to stretch that other $7 as far as we can. Now we are going to be refurbishing a few items, and then we'll just simply replace a few others. First thing we're going to do, start in on that engine.
Yeah, after digging around a little bit, we figured out that this is an FCT coded small block, which means at some point in this car's life, someone, probably a high school kid, blew up the original 305. Now, this block's out of a 1984 Chevy C10 pickup truck, but the top end's all Iroc, right down to the tune port injection.
First order of business, we're going to take us a field trip down to Engine Power and set this thing on the chassis dyno so that we can set us a baseline. You ready, big guy?
I think so, and I brought along some fashion accessories, so maybe I'll fit in a little better with the car.
This being an Iroc and all, it honestly feels like we're living in an 80s rock video. So why not embrace that concept?
Yeah, especially when it comes to the hair. All right.
It's raining awesomeness back there. First pull, 151 horsepower.
Woo! Honestly, that sounds about right for the wear and tear on this 305. And she's pretty consistent too.
7/10 more of 1 horsepower.
All right, I think we got it.
Whopping 152.
152?
Tell you what, cuz.
Well, 152 horsepower, that's not gonna cut it. Now, as iconic as that Iroc Z may be, the 305 under the hood's never really been known to be a powerhouse. Now, just to check, we went ahead and did a compression test, and a couple of the cylinders are down. So, instead of just throwing our budget at the 305, which is a little scary, we're gonna just go ahead and pull it out.
It'll be a lot easier to work once the coolant system is out of the way, but we're going to keep it to be reused later on.
Well, we could tear down our 305 and freshen it up. We could even throw a stroker kit at it, but that would require some machining and purchase of the kit. And we'd still only be at about 330 cubic inches. What's better than that? 350 cubic inches. We got this short block Chevy right here, and it is a bit used, but we're already gonna be about 45 cubic inches ahead. Now, a lot of you gearheads at home might have something like this laying around, or you know someone who does, like we do. We went down to Engine Power and picked this up, This is from an old project of theirs, and it's got some miles on it, but this is exactly the kind of thing you can find online for about $500. So just to be fair, we're gonna throw $500 on our budget and roll with this. First thing we'll do is get the timing cover out of the way to allow access to the timing set and cam. It looks like the engine power guys put a nice double roller on here, but it still needs to go so that we can get to the cam.
We're not sure what kind of grind this cam has, which is the case a lot of you would run into whenever you pick up a used block. So we'll just go ahead and pull it. A bolt placed into the end of the crankshaft makes it a lot easier for our puller to get this gear off. It's a nice part, but we want to make sure the one that we use matches the pieces we're going to install.
Some Scott shop towels will be a big help in keeping any debris out of the inside of our block, since the next step is going to involve cleaning it up. We've got to scrape off some old silicone and gaskets because you have to make sure that your new ones will get a good seal, as well as allowing the parts to seat properly.
After the break, find out what kind of goodies are going to put some pep in the step of our Iroc.
All right, guys, we got our engine all cleaned up and we're ready to start bolting on our Go Fast goodies. Now we got us a top end kit from Trick Float that's going to give that F-body some giddy up and go. Our kit includes a set of 1.5 ratio aluminum roller rockers, a billet timing chain, all the lifters we're going to need, and a bump stick that's going to give us some performance and that sweet sound. These heads are the best part of our upgrade. It's a set of aluminum Trick Flow 195s. They have the 62cc chamber, the 202 and 160 valves, and they're really going to complement that little small block Chevy. To top it all off, this street burner aluminum dual plane intake with that open air design that's going to help keep your fuel charge a little cooler.
When you're installing a set of heads, it's of utmost importance to torque the head bolts to the proper poundage, as well as follow the torque sequence that the manufacturer recommends. This is the sequence for these heads.
The cam came with a packet of assembly lube, but if your cam doesn't, you need to make sure that you get your hands on some. It stays on the parts for those first few critical moments when your engine is initially fired. One good way to do it without mess is to lube the lobes and bearings as it goes into the engine. Just be sure that you don't use so much of it that you don't have any left for the last few inches.
Now we can install the crank gear that came with our Trick Flow timing set. Using a brass drift on alternating sides is a good way to prevent damaging it. Now for the cam gear, which is a little more complex. Now when we're installing a timing set on a small block Chevy like this, we like to point the timing marks at each other, which is the easiest way to make sure you're not going to get the chain off by a tooth. But you have to remember, when you do this, even though the number one cylinder is at the top, it's at the top of the exhaust stroke and not at the top of the compression stroke. So once we get the timing chain on, we're going to turn the crankshaft over one full revolution, which will bring this timing mark to the top and get us at true top dead center.
Like he said, you gotta make sure that the indicators are dead on once the chain is installed. Then we can install the button and it gets cinched down. The button isn't mandatory, but it helps to keep the cam where it's supposed to be. And these tabs keep it all locked in place. Now it can be spun to true top dead center with the timing mark pointing straight up.
We can get the gasket in place and then install our shiny new chrome timing cover. If you use a power tool like this to run the bolts in, be sure to leave them a couple of turns out so that you can torque them to the proper amount. While we've been installing our camshaft and timing set, our lifters here have been soaking in some conventional 30-weight oil. The reason we do this is because these hydraulic lifters need to be pre-soaked so they're primed when we get them in the engine.
The heads come with ARP studs, and we'll use some ARP fastener lubricant on the threads, as well as some royal purple assembly lube on the push rods and valve stems. Then the rockers can be laid into place. We'll tighten the nuts down until we hit resistance.
Now we're getting ready to adjust our rocker arms. Now since these are hydraulic lifters, we have to adjust these to 0 lash, which means there's going to be no space, no play in between the rocker and the valve stem. The best way to do this is when the exhaust valve begins to open, we adjust the intake side, and then when the intake side begins to close, that's when you adjust the exhaust side. Okay, first the intake. Turn it until you begin to feel resistance, then grab your wrench. We'll take it down a half turn, then just a little farther with the set screw to keep it in place. Then we need to spin the engine until the intake starts to close. Then we'll jump on the exhaust side rocker. It's the same procedure on all the rest of the rockers.
Stick around and uncover our budget horsepower secret.
Hey guys, while you were gone, we went ahead and installed some new valve covers, new water pump, reinstalled the balancer and the oil pan, and we switched over to this Accel Vacuum Advanced HEI distributor that we got from Summit Racing. The reason we had to do that is because when we got rid of our EFI system, we got rid of the distributor that was electronically controlled and switched over to this Vacuum Advanced. Now, if you guys remember, we rotated the crankshaft over 1 full revolution, bringing us up to true top dead center. We have the rotor pointed at cylinder number 1, made a mark right here. We're going to line it up. And that's where we'll put the number 1 wire.
One great thing about this particular engine swap is that since it's just another small block Chevy, it will plug right into the hole without any modification to the mounts or transmission. We had to pull the valve covers to keep them from getting scarred up, but if that's the worst thing we have to deal with, we're in pretty good shape. While you guys wasn't looking, we went ahead and buttoned up the belt drive and the cooling system on our Iroc. Now we're going to move on to the fuel system. Now originally this car came with fuel injection, but now it's going to be running a 600 Holley. One of the issues with converting it over to the carburetor is the fuel supply. The pump that's in this car makes too much pressure, so we'll just simply dial it back using a regulator.
But before we put the carb on, we've got something extra juicy to bolt on first. Now that extra jolt we're talking about is going to come from this Sniper Nitrous kit from NOS. It's going to add up to 150 extra horsepower on top of what our 350 is going to produce, and that's good for us because we're on a budget, and when it comes to power adders, you're not going to find much better bang for your buck than a nitrous kit. Now this is a plate style system which utilizes this injector plate, and it bolts between the carb and the intake, and it also comes with all the plumbing to hook it up. These jets that come with the kit will give us an extra 100, 125, or 150 horsepower, depending on which pair we use. And of course, it comes with all the electrical components to arm the system. Now we went ahead and assembled our plate with the solenoids. And then we put the jets in there for the 100 shot because we wanted to be a little conservative, at least for now. You need to make sure this plate goes with the NOS side pointing up, and we can put our gasket on for the carb, drop on our Holley carb, and lock it down. We'll use these adapters on the stock fuel lines and mount our regulator on the wheel well. We made a couple of hoses that will tie the feed and return lines to it, so we'll plug those in as well. Be sure to use a proper anodized line wrench if you're utilizing A-N fittings. Then we can tie in the lines to the solenoid in the carb because it's a wet nitrous system, meaning that it sprays more gas as well as the nitrous oxide. We'll then hook up our nitrous line and get our bottle stowed in the back of the car.
Now we're getting to the end of the road when it comes to our install here. Next thing we're going to do is finish up the wiring. First thing that you would normally do is mount you a big gnarly switch inside the cockpit somewhere. That thing will energize the system. And then the next thing you would want to do is wire up this micro switch. And what it does, it actually energizes those solenoids. It makes everything get happy. This micro switch is actually pretty simple. When the throttle gets punched all the way up, it pushes on the switch and closes the circuit, which then sprays our go-go juice.
Up next, it's dyno time.
We've got our 350 plugged into our little yellow Iroc, and she's ready to go back on the old dyno down in engine power.
You ready to do this?
Yeah, I'm out of the way.
All right. You might want to stand back now.
$227.
Say that again?
227.
227?
227. Yeah, our first pull, our power number wasn't that impressive, but after our upgrades, drastic improvement.
We're not trying to lay down earth-shattering numbers with this budget small block, but we're already quite a bit ahead of where we started. And she's looking really consistent with the pulls. It looks like we're up about 75 horsepower.
All right, guys, we're going to pull a little bit of timing out of this thing, and pretty much a rule of thumb is 2 degrees per 50 shot. The reason you'd want to do that is because pulling the timing out of it, it reduces the chances of detonation. Because whenever you spray in that nitrous, this increases the cylinder pressure. Another thing that you'd want to do is put in a cooler set of plugs, and we went ahead and done that whenever we were doing the install.
With our 100 shot of nitrous, we're pulling 4 degrees of base timing out, putting it right at 4 degrees. A little bit. Little bit. Right there. All right, here we go.
Let me step out of the way. Uh-oh.
It didn't like that, did it?
I bet it ain't got no gas in it. Once we manage to find a can of gas, it's time for a motor-only run with that timing pulled out, just to make sure it still likes it.
220. Yeah, that's what it made before. All right, so we're all finished with our all motor run, so we're gonna go ahead and arm the system here. Try the nitrous. She pulls a lot harder with the spray, putting it right at 294 horsepower and 351 foot-pounds of torque. Okay, well, we managed to put a lot more pep in the step of this Iroc, and we're gonna stay conservative on things like the tune, the timing, and the nitrous because this is a budget build and we don't want to find the next weakest link.
Further down the road, you never know. We may end up throwing the spurs to her just a little bit more. But hey, even erring on the side of caution, we still managed to double the power that we started with. And with about $3,500 more to spend, there's still a lot more room to make on the improvements of the suspension and the interior.